Hello everyone and welcome to AP Biology with Mr. Jennings. Today we're going to talk about nucleic acids. This here is probably one of the simpler groups of macromolecules. So simple it's actually overlooked for quite a long time. So what makes it so simple? Well, part of it is not actually the compound. The components of it is pretty basic. It's carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, but also nitrogen and phosphorus. So it's got a little bit more going on. Its function, as we learn later on in science, when we say fairly, we're talking like in the last 60 years, is an info storage molecule. And it only has two major classifications, DNA and RNA. Now it does have a monomer. It's called the nucleotide. Now nucleotides are unique because of the very basic structure, kind of like how proteins have a very basic structure. All nucleotides have a phosphate group, a 5-carbon, or what we call a pentose sugar. This is another word for 5-carbon sugar. Pento, meaning 5. And a nitrogenous base. And there's about 5 of those we know of that we commonly talk about. There's actually dozens. So it can be one of those three. And for the sugar, it can be either, deoxyribose or just ribose. And those subtle differences do matter in terms of chemistry. And the nitrogen bases can be either A, T, C, G, or U. Now, as I said, there's actually dozens of nitrogenous bases. So if you look it up, you'll find a lot out there. And they're usually just some kind of variant of these 5, but they are different, chemically speaking. So often when we talk about nucleic acids, we have to talk about DNA versus RNA. So DNA is probably the one most of us are familiar with. It's deoxyribose is a sugar. Its bases are A, T, C, and G. That means adenine, thymine, cytosine, guanine. And it's a double-stranded structure. Typically, we call it a double helix. It looks like this. And most of us know that. It's one of the most famous-looking molecules in science. It's common in pop culture now. Now, RNA has a sugar known as ribose. The only difference here is the number of oxygens. Bases, adenine, uracil, cytosine, guanine. So pretty basic. And strands. It's actually a single-stranded compound, but it can actually be found in double strands in some places. But typically we see it as a single-stranded molecule. So the reason we thought this thing was so simple that it was actually doing not much at all was the fact that it only has 4 bases. I mean, it can only do things 4 different ways. How many different variations can we have of just 4 atoms? And it's really where the complexity was not apparent at first. As we'll learn future in the course, those 4 bases can be arranged in so many different ways that you end up getting a lot of variation. Alright, so let's talk about DNA. DNA is kind of boring. Not to be rude to it. It's very important. But it's boring because it only does a couple things. Its function is to store information about primary structure of a protein. That's it. It's 2 chains of covalently bonded nucleotides with hydrogen bonds holding them together. And that's about it. We'll talk more about DNA structure when we get to that point. But that's pretty much it. It's all it does. Cool. And just a little bit more here about the structure. Again, the chains are bonded together by hydrogen bonds between adenine and thymine and cytosine guanine. Most of us are familiar with that. Now, RNA. That's the interesting one. See, RNA's function is not only does it transmit and translate DNA, it also does enzymatic and regulatory function. We're going to learn here in a little while that we actually believe RNA was the first of the genetic molecules because it does so many other things. It's the RNA world hypothesis that RNA came first. See, there's only one type of DNA, really. Now, we have bioengineering stuff. We can make little intermediates. There's only one major DNA type. RNA, there's at least 15, if not more. And we talk about 3 major classifications, and we kind of don't do them their proper due. But it does matter that it is at least 15 types, and they do so many different things. Now, when we talk about RNA and DNA, we need to talk about the central dogma. We're going to spend a good portion of this class on central dogma. It's one of our biggest 2 units. And that is that biosystems, not only do they process matter and energy, they also process information. So the DNA we start off with is transcribed into RNA, which is then translated into the protein. These 3 basic steps is the foundation for all life on this planet. And any alteration in that step can change life and cause evolution. So it's a very complex process. Now, let's just do a little summation here. So, in summary, when we talk about nucleic acids, they are pretty much the basics. There's not much to talk about, at least not on this level of the course. We'll talk more about DNA structure and RNA structure when the time arises, because we don't want to go into that right now. But it is fairly basic, but it's unassuming in its basicness. It does so much with so little, and it's what makes it so interesting. It's one of the things that puzzled scientists for so long, that when we discovered it, it changed everything. It is the central, most important molecule in all of biology. Yes, proteins matter, but without DNA, the instructions to make those proteins don't exist, and those proteins will not be reliably made. So we're going to spend a lot of time in the coming weeks talking about evolution as our next major unit, and our first real major unit. And when we talk about evolution, we talk about changes in DNA and how that affects proteins. So one of the reasons we wanted to make sure that we talked about all these macromolecules first and talked about the basic chemistry was that when we go through evolution here in a little bit, we don't lose those who don't really recall what is DNA and RNA. Now, we won't get into the intricacies of the structure and how mutations matter just yet. We will talk about mutations, but we won't talk about the mechanics behind it. Yet, I think it's really important to get that out of the way. So, next unit is when we're going to start probably my favorite unit in biology, and this favorite concept, and that's evolution. The idea that organisms change over time and beget new life is so wild to me, and it's always something that's interested me even as a small child. So, I look forward to talking about that with y'all. Keep in touch. Thank you for watching. Have fun.